3 months after the passport incident, the impact continued to ripple through the airline industry and beyond. The original video had become a powerful teaching tool shown in corporate training sessions across the country. But the real changes were happening behind the scenes, where they mattered most. The airline had completely revamped its training program. In the sleek corporate training center, new flight attendants watched the incident video, followed by Ms. Taylor's recorded message about the importance of treating every passenger with respect. "This isn't about punishment," her voice explained to each new class. "It's about growth and understanding." The young mother and her daughter, whose "Be Kind" drawing had touched hearts worldwide, were invited to speak at the airline's annual conference. The little girl, now seeing her simple artwork displayed on the giant screen behind her, smiled as she told the audience, "My mom says that being nice doesn't cost anything." Former flight attendant Rodriguez had finally broken her silence, appearing in a documentary about bias in the service industry. "I lost everything because I let my prejudices control my actions," she admitted, her voice heavy with regret. "I hope others learn from my mistake." Her story became a cautionary tale in human resources departments nationwide. Flight Attendant Park had been promoted to lead the airline's new passenger advocacy program. "We're training our staff to recognize and interrupt bias before it escalates," she explained to a room full of industry representatives. "One person speaking up can make all the difference." The retired judge who witnessed everything had worked with the airline to develop a passenger bill of rights, which was now displayed at every gate. "Clear guidelines protect everyone," he explained during its unveiling. "Both passengers and staff need to know exactly what's expected and what's unacceptable." Ms. Taylor's professional life had transformed. She'd accepted a position as Chief Technology Officer at a major tech firm, where she also headed their diversity and inclusion initiatives. "Sometimes life's worst moments lead to unexpected opportunities," she told a graduating class during a commencement speech. "It's not about what happens to you, but how do you respond to it?" The airline industry as a whole had undergone a subtle but significant shift. Passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped by 30% across all major carriers. Anonymous reporting systems had been implemented, allowing staff to flag concerning behavior without fear of retaliation. The tech executive who had witnessed the incident had started a nonprofit organization connecting minority professionals with travel advocacy groups. "We're building a support network," she explained in a viral TED talk. "No one should face discrimination alone, whether they're in the air or on the ground." Social media had played its part too. The trending hashtag had evolved into a movement, with people sharing stories of both discrimination and positive change. "Remember the torn passport?" became shorthand for moments when institutions were held accountable for their employees' actions. The airline's response had become a Harvard Business School case study taught to future business leaders as an example of crisis management done right. "They didn't just apologize," the professor explained to her students. "They turned a crisis into an opportunity for systematic change." Even the airport had changed. The gate where the incident occurred now displayed a large art installation featuring photographs of diverse travelers sharing their stories. Among them was the "Be Kind" drawing, now professionally framed, a simple reminder that sometimes the most powerful messages come from the most innocent sources. As for the viral video itself, it had found a permanent home in the Smithsonian's digital archive, preserved as a moment when social media, corporate responsibility, and social justice intersected to create lasting change. 1 year to the day after the incident, Ms. Taylor boarded another flight at the same airport. The difference was palpable, from the diverse crew to the welcoming atmosphere. As she settled into her seat, she noticed a small card in the seat back pocket. It read, "Every passenger has a story. Every story matters." Below it was a QR code linking to the airline's new inclusivity pledge. Just before takeoff, she received a message from the young mother whose daughter had drawn the picture. Attached was a new drawing showing a diverse group of people on an airplane, all smiling. The caption, written in crayon, read, "Now everyone is kind." Ms. Taylor smiled, took a photo of the clouds through her window, and posted it with a simple caption, "Change starts with one moment, but it takes all of us to make it last." By sunset that same day, the incident had exploded across social media platforms worldwide. The first video, posted by the college student who'd been live streaming, had already reached 10 million views. New angles of the incident kept appearing as passengers shared their recordings, each one adding to the growing wave of public reaction. "This is how you handle a crisis," wrote a popular business commentator, sharing the airline's official statement. The company's swift action in firing Rodriguez and their transparent response had earned praise from crisis management experts and civil rights organizations alike. The tech executive who had witnessed everything posted a lengthy thread about her own experiences with travel discrimination. "Today, I watched a fellow professional face something many of us have encountered. But this time, it was caught on camera. This time, there were consequences." News channels picked up the story, running special segments that featured interviews with aviation experts and civil rights attorneys. "What makes this incident particularly significant," explained one legal analyst, "is how it perfectly captured the moment when unconscious bias turned into overt discrimination." Inside her hotel room, Ms. Taylor sat with her laptop, watching the story unfold across the internet. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages of support from colleagues, friends, and even strangers who'd been moved by her dignified response to the situation. The young mother from the flight had shared the story of her daughter's drawing, which quickly became its own viral moment. "My 6-year-old saw injustice and responded with kindness," she wrote. "Sometimes our children show us the way." The post had been shared hundreds of thousands of times. Mainstream news websites ran headlines like "Torn Passport, Shattered Career," "How One Flight Attendant's Actions Sparked a National Conversation," and "Airlines Face Reckoning as Discriminatory Incident Goes Viral." The retired judge who had witnessed everything appeared on a morning news show. "In my years on the bench, I saw many cases of discrimination," he said, "but rarely have I seen such a clear example of bias in action, followed by such appropriate consequences." Flight attendant Park's attempt to intervene had also gained attention. "This is what being an ally looks like," wrote a popular social commentator, sharing the clip of Park trying to stop her colleague. "It's not enough to disagree silently with discrimination, we must actively oppose it." The airline's stock price initially dropped when the first video surfaced but rebounded strongly after their decisive response. Corporate analysts praised their crisis management, with one noting, "They turned a potential disaster into a masterclass in corporate responsibility." Support groups for airline workers of color began sharing their own stories, creating a trending hashtag that encouraged others to speak up about their experiences. The incident had opened a floodgate of similar stories that had gone unreported or unaddressed. Ms. Taylor's professional network grew exponentially as technology leaders reached out to express their support. Job offers poured in from companies impressed by her poise under pressure. "This is the kind of leadership we need," wrote one CEO. "Someone who can face unfair treatment with dignity and help turn it into a teaching moment." The airline industry as a whole began facing tough questions about their training practices. Other carriers rushed to announce reviews of their own policies, hoping to prevent similar incidents. Industry publications ran special issues dedicated to examining bias in air travel. By evening, the video had reached international audiences, with news outlets from London to Tokyo covering the story. Comments in multiple languages flooded social media, many sharing similar experiences from around the world. The incident was quickly becoming a case study in both what not to do and how to respond when things go wrong. Business schools reached out to the airline, requesting permission to use the incident and their response in future corporate training materials. As the day drew to a close, Ms. Taylor posted her own message. "Thank you for all the support. Let's use this moment not for division, but for positive change." One incident captured on camera has revealed what many face every day. Now that we see it, we can work together to stop it. The airline's first-class lounge had been cleared of other passengers, creating a private space for what would become a defining moment in the company's history. The regional operations director sat across from Ms. Taylor, while nearby, the airline's legal team participated via video call on a large screen. The torn passport pieces lay on the table between them, a silent testament to the morning's events. "Before we begin," the operations director said, her voice firm and clear, "I want to say something not as an airline representative, but as a human being. What happened to you today was inexcusable. There will be no attempts to justify it or sweep it under the rug. Ms. Taylor nodded, her composure still intact despite the exhausting morning. Her own legal team remained on video call on her phone, which sat propped up on the table. The company's PR director had also joined the meeting, his face grave as he watched the situation unfold. "We've reviewed the videos," the operations director continued, gesturing to her tablet where multiple angles of the incident played silently. "We've also spoken to 17 witnesses, including crew members, passengers, and airport staff. The facts are crystal clear." Outside the lounge, news of the incident had already spread across social media. The airline's customer service lines were flooded with calls from concerned frequent flyers, all demanding to know how the company would handle this situation. "Our response will be swift and decisive," the PR director announced, leaning into his camera. "We've prepared a public statement, but we want to run it by you first, Ms. Taylor. Your voice matters in how we address this." A gentle knock at the door interrupted them. It was Flight Attendant Park, still in uniform but visibly shaken. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said softly, "but I felt I needed to speak up. I witnessed everything, and I want to formally apologize for not intervening sooner." Ms. Taylor's expression softened. "You tried to help," she reminded Park. "I saw you attempt to step in several times." The operations director made a note on her tablet. "That's consistent with other witness statements. Park, your commitment to our passengers will be remembered. Please join us." As Park took a seat, the head of human resources entered the lounge, carrying a folder thick with documents. "I've reviewed Rodriguez's personnel file," she announced. There were 2 previous incidents of questionable passenger interactions, though nothing approaching this severity. Both were addressed with additional training. The operations director's expression hardened. "That ends today. Ms. Taylor, I want you to know that Flight Attendant Rodriguez's employment with our airline has been terminated, effective immediately. We're also revoking her flight privileges and industry credentials." A murmur of approval came from the legal team on the video call. The PR director nodded, adding, "We're also launching a comprehensive review of our training programs. This incident has exposed gaps in our system that need to be addressed." Ms. Taylor leaned forward, her voice steady. "I appreciate the swift action, but what about other passengers who might face similar treatment? Not everyone has a plane full of witnesses and dozens of camera phones recording." The operations director smiled for the first time that morning. "That's exactly what we want to discuss next. We'd like your input on improving our training programs. Your experience, though traumatic, could help prevent this from happening to anyone else." Just then, another knock came at the door. A representative from the passport office had arrived, ready to begin the emergency replacement process. The airline had already arranged for expedited service at their expense. "One more thing," the PR director added, "we'd like to offer you lifetime premium status with our airline. Not as compensation, we know there's no making up for what happened, but as a gesture of our commitment to earning back your trust." The head of HR spoke up again. "And Rodriguez, she's outside. She's asking to apologize personally. It's completely your choice whether to accept that request." Ms. Taylor took a deep breath, considering the offer. Her decision in this moment would set the tone for how this incident would be remembered, not just as a story of discrimination, but potentially as one of learning and growth. The operations director watched Ms. Taylor carefully, respecting her moment of contemplation. Outside the lounge windows, planes continued taking off and landing, a reminder that while this incident had paused one morning's flight, its impact would ripple through the industry for years to come. Within minutes, the gate area had transformed into a flurry of activity. Airport security officers arrived first, their uniforms parting the crowd of onlookers who had gathered at the terminal windows. Behind them came a distinguished-looking woman in a crisp business suit, the airline's regional operations director, who had been in a nearby terminal and rushed over upon hearing the news. Ms. Taylor stood calmly at the center of it all, her phone now connected to a video call with her company's legal team. The torn pieces of her passport lay carefully preserved in an evidence bag, photographed and documented by airport security. Around her, passengers continued recording, their phones capturing every development of the unfolding situation. "Let me get this straight," the operations director said, her voice controlled but filled with disbelief. You deliberately destroyed a passenger's government-issued passport. She stared at Rodriguez, who had backed herself against the cabin wall, the gravity of her actions finally sinking in. I thought it was fake," Rodriguez mumbled, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "I was just trying to protect the airline." The retired judge who had witnessed everything stepped forward. "With all due respect," he interjected, "I've been watching this young lady since she arrived at the gate. She presented herself professionally, showed every required document, and remained remarkably composed despite facing clear discrimination." A group of international business travelers nodded in agreement. One of them, a tech executive, spoke up. "We've all been through passport checks countless times. This was something else entirely." The operations director turned to Miss Taylor, her expression sincere. "Ma'am, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry we are for this incident. Would you please come with me to our first-class lounge? We need to document everything properly, and I want to ensure you have all the support you need to deal with this situation." Ms. Taylor nodded, but before moving, she turned to address the crowd of witnesses. "Thank you all for your support and for documenting what happened here. It means a lot to know that so many people were willing to stand up against what they knew was wrong." The elderly woman who had spoken up earlier approached Ms. Taylor. "Dear, I've been flying for over 50 years, and I've never seen anything like this. You handled yourself with such grace. Here's my card. I insist on being a character witness if you need one." Meanwhile, the captain had made a difficult but necessary decision. He approached the operations director and spoke in low tones. "We'll need to delay the flight. Given what's happened, we need to ensure all proper protocols are followed, and frankly, we'll need to arrange for replacement cabin crew." Rodriguez's face crumpled as she overheard this. Her colleague, Park, who had been helping document the incident, couldn't even look at her. 12 years of service, and it had all come down to this moment of inexcusable judgment. The operations director nodded at the captain's assessment, then turned to address the waiting passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're arranging for a new crew to take over this flight. All passengers will receive compensation for the inconvenience, and our guest services team will be here shortly to assist everyone." As they waited, passengers shared their videos in a specially created group chat, ensuring that multiple angles of the incident were preserved. The tech executive who had spoken earlier was already in touch with her company's HR department, offering Ms. Taylor a potential job opportunity, a silver lining that would emerge from this dark cloud. The young mother who had explained the situation to her child earlier approached Ms. Taylor with a small drawing her daughter had made during the wait. It showed stick figures holding hands in a circle, with the words "Be kind" written in crayon across the top. This simple gesture brought the first tears to Ms. Taylor's eyes since the incident began. As airport police finished taking statements and the new crew began arriving, everyone knew they had witnessed something that would spark important conversations about prejudice, power, and accountability in the travel industry. What happened next would demonstrate how one company chose to handle a crisis that threatened to define its corporate culture. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As the head purser reached the scene, Rodriguez's face twisted with a mixture of frustration and misplaced authority. Without warning, she gripped Ms. Taylor's passport firmly in both hands. The sound that followed, the harsh rip of paper and laminate, echoed through the suddenly silent cabin like a thunderclap. Time seemed to freeze. Miss Taylor's eyes widened in disbelief as she watched her passport torn in two, pieces dangling from Rodriguez's trembling hands. The head purser stopped mid-step, mouth agape. For a moment, nobody moved, as if everyone needed time to process the shocking reality of what they'd just witnessed. Then, all at once, the cabin erupted. "Did she just?" gasped a teenager in line, her phone steady as she captured everything. "That's destruction of government property," shouted the businessman in the charcoal suit, already dialing on his phone. The elderly woman in first class stood up, her voice carrying years of authority. "Young lady, you've just committed a federal offense." Miss Taylor, still maintaining remarkable composure, raised her phone higher to ensure she captured everything clearly. Her hands were shaking, but her voice remained steady as she spoke directly into her camera. "I want everyone to witness what this flight attendant just did to my valid passport." Rodriguez's triumphant expression melted away as reality crashed in. The torn passport in her hands suddenly felt like it was burning. She looked around, finally noticing the forest of phones recording her actions, the horrified expressions on her colleagues' faces, and the head purser's thunderous look. I was just doing my job," Rodriguez stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. The pieces of the passport slipped from her fingers, floating to the carpet like fallen leaves. Flight Attendant Park quickly stepped forward, carefully picking up the torn passport pieces. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to Miss Taylor, her voice sincere and horrified. "I'll get an evidence bag for these." The head purser finally found her voice. "Everyone, please state where you are," she announced firmly. "Security and the flight manager are on their way." She turned to Rodriguez, her expression hard as steel. "Step away from the cabin entrance, now." A young mother in line was explaining to her curious child in a hushed voice, "Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices, honey. That's why it's important to always treat people with respect." Ms. Taylor took several deep breaths, her professional demeanor intact despite the situation. "I would like to speak with the airline's highest-ranking representative available," she stated clearly. "I'd also need to contact my company's legal department and the embassy immediately." The other passengers had formed a protective circle around Ms. Taylor, offering support and their contact information as witnesses. A retired judge spoke up from his seat. "I saw everything. I'll gladly provide testimony about what happened here." Through the windows, several airport security vehicles could be seen approaching the gate, their lights flashing. Rodriguez stood alone now, her colleagues having stepped away from her. The reality of her actions was starting to sink in, and her face had gone pale. The live streams continued, comments flooding in from around the world. The incident was already trending on social media, with aviation experts and civil rights advocates weighing in. What had started as a routine boarding process had transformed into a career-ending moment that would be discussed in training seminars for years to come. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was charged with tension and disbelief. The captain emerged from the cockpit, having been notified of the situation. His expression was grave as he surveyed the scene. In the next few minutes, decisions would be made that would affect everyone involved, but one thing was already crystal clear: there was no coming back from this moment. The torn passport lay in Park's evidence bag, a stark reminder of how quickly prejudice and abuse of power could destroy not only a document but also a career, and how a single moment of poor judgment could become a lasting symbol of everything wrong with systemic bias in the travel industry. The growing tension at the cabin entrance had caught everyone's attention. Ms. Taylor stood her ground, briefcase still in hand, as Flight Attendant Rodriguez continued to scrutinize her passport with unnecessary intensity. The line of passengers behind them had grown longer, and the quiet murmurs of confusion were growing louder. "Ma'am," Ms. Taylor said again, her voice steady despite the situation, "I've flown over 50 international flights this year alone. My passport has been checked by security, by the desk agent, and by customs countless times." She pulled out her phone, ready to show her extensive travel history and company credentials. But Rodriguez wasn't interested in additional proof. Her face had taken on a stern expression that her coworkers knew all too well. It was the look she got when she thought she'd caught someone breaking the rules, a look that had earned her both praise and criticism over the years. "How do you explain these irregularities?" Rodriguez demanded, pointing to perfectly normal security features of the passport. By now, other crew members were exchanging worried glances. Flight Attendant Park, who had been watching nervously, stepped forward to intervene. "Perhaps I could help," Park began, but Rodriguez cut her off with a sharp gesture. The other passengers weren't staying quiet anymore. A businessman in a charcoal suit spoke up from the line. "Come on, we're all going to miss our connections at this rate." Others nodded in agreement, and several phones were now recording the incident. Miss Taylor remained remarkably composed, though anyone looking closely could see her hands trembling slightly. She'd worked too hard to let someone's unfair suspicions derail her business trip. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she stated firmly. "This is completely inappropriate." A young couple who had already boarded and were watching from their nearby seats began whispering to each other. The wife pulled out her tablet, quickly looking up airline policies about passenger rights. Her husband was already typing a message to the airline's customer service. Rodriguez's face flushed red. "Do you know how many fake documents I've caught over the years?" she asked loudly, though no one had questioned her experience. "I know what I'm looking at, and this isn't right." Her voice carried through the cabin, causing several more passengers to stand up and watch. "My company booked this ticket," Ms. Taylor explained patiently, pulling up her corporate travel app. "I'm a senior software engineer heading to our Tokyo office for a project launch. Everything is in order, and you're causing a scene for no reason." The flight's head purser, who had been notified of the delay, was now hurrying down the jet bridge. But before she could reach them, Rodriguez's next actions would shock everyone present. "A software engineer?" Rodriguez scoffed, her voice dripping with disbelief. "And I suppose this first-class ticket is normal for you?" The prejudice in her tone was unmistakable, causing several passengers to gasp audibly. Ms. Taylor took another deep breath, years of dealing with similar situations evident in her controlled response. "Yes, it is normal. My position requires frequent international travel, and my company values their employees' comfort on long-haul flights. Now, please return my passport." By now, nearly every passenger within earshot was recording the interaction. An elderly woman seated in first class shook her head disapprovingly at Rodriguez's behavior. A group of college students further back in the line had already started live-streaming the incident. The tension in the air was electric. Rodriguez held the passport in both hands, her knuckles white with tension. The head purser was just steps away, and Miss Taylor stood firm, phone still in hand, documenting everything. In the next few seconds, Rodriguez would make a decision that would not only end her career, but would also become a viral moment seen by millions around the world. No one could have predicted what happened next, but everyone present knew they were watching something that would have serious consequences. The morning sun streaming through the cabin windows illuminated the scene like a spotlight, and dozens of cameras were ready to capture the shocking moment that was about to unfold. The morning sun had barely peeked through the windows of Los Angeles International Airport when flight attendant Rodriguez started her day like any other. With her crisp navy blue uniform perfectly pressed and her silver wings pinned gleaming under the fluorescent lights, she walked through the bustling terminal with the confidence of someone who had ruled these aisles for over 12 years. "Another day, another flight," she muttered to herself, adjusting her name tag that read A. Rodriguez as she passed her reflection in the airport windows. Little did she know, this ordinary Tuesday would become the day that would turn her entire career upside down. The boarding process for flight PA-218 to Tokyo had just begun, and Rodriguez was stationed at the cabin entrance, greeting passengers with what her colleagues often described as a scrutinizing smile. She took pride in being known as the most thorough flight attendant in her crew, though some whispered that her attention to detail sometimes crossed into unnecessary suspicion. As the first-class passengers began boarding, Rodriguez noticed a young woman approaching the entrance. The passenger wore a perfectly tailored business suit and carried a designer laptop bag, but something about her made Rodriguez straighten her posture and narrow her eyes. Perhaps it was the passenger's youth, or maybe it was something else entirely, something that spoke more about Rodriguez's own prejudices than anything else. The young woman, who would later be known across social media as Ms. Taylor, stepped forward with her boarding pass and passport in hand. Despite her first-class ticket and professional demeanor, Rodriguez immediately began examining her documents with an intensity that caught the attention of nearby passengers. "Good morning," Miss Taylor said politely, maintaining eye contact with a confident smile. She was clearly used to traveling, her movements showing the practiced ease of a frequent flyer. The boarding pass was perfectly in order. A first-class ticket paid for by one of Silicon Valley's top tech companies, where she worked as a senior software engineer. But Rodriguez wasn't looking at the boarding pass anymore. Her attention was fixed on the passport, her fingers running along its edges as if searching for something only she could see. The line behind Miss Taylor grew longer, and passengers began shifting uncomfortably as the inspection dragged on. "Is there a problem?" Miss Taylor asked, her voice calm but firm. She'd been through similar situations before, the subtle questioning, the extra scrutiny, but something about Rodriguez's demeanor suggested this time might be different. Other crew members noticed the growing tension. A younger flight attendant named Park took a step closer, sensing that something wasn't right. The natural chatter of boarding passengers began to dim as more people turned their attention to the scene unfolding at the cabin entrance. "This passport," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying a note of accusation. "Something's not right with it." She held the document up to the light, turning it this way and that despite the fact that every security checkpoint in the airport had already verified its authenticity. Ms. Taylor took a deep breath, maintaining her professional composure. "My passport is perfectly valid," she stated clearly, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I travel internationally for work almost every month. If you have concerns, we can certainly speak with a supervisor." But Rodriguez wasn't listening anymore. Her face had taken on a strange expression, a mixture of triumph and righteousness that would soon turn to regret. She gripped the passport tighter, and in the next moment, she would make a decision that would not only end her career, but would also spark a national conversation about prejudice and power in the airline industry. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and every person within earshot could sense that they were about to witness something unprecedented. Phones were already being pulled out, their cameras ready to capture whatever came next. The next few seconds would change multiple lives forever and transform an ordinary morning at LAX into a moment that would be remembered for years to come.